Capital structure. First point of discussion. Modigliani and Miller proposition regarding capital structure. Now see at level 2, this reading is purely theoretical. There are hardly any calculations. So you just need to remember a few small things in every LOS, and once you do that, then you're fine with this reading. So first point of discussion is Modigliani and Miller proposition regarding capital structure. Okay, so there are multiple, this is coming out of a research paper written by these two professors, and what they're trying to tell you in this is what is the ideal capital structure. How do you decide a firm should have how much of debt, how much of equity? So there are multiple propositions in this. This is your point of discussion, that if you, what is the effect on cost of equity of leverage, effect on cost of equity of taxes and financial distress, agency cost, asymmetric information. Let's start. Proposition number 1, capital structure irrelevance proposition. What could this mean? So what Modigliani and Miller, first proposition, they are making an assumption that there are no taxes, and what they're trying to propose in this is that irrespective of what is the mix of equity and debt, the value of firm will always be same. Are you following this? So let's say there are two firms. A has 70% debt, 30% equity. Firm B has let us say 50% debt, 50% equity. What MM1 says is that if you are living in a world there are no transactions, no transaction costs, no taxes, then irrespective of how it is funded, the value of the firm is going to be same as long as their earning before interest and taxes are same. Okay, so let us look at certain assumptions here. Value of the firm is unaffected by capital structure. That's the proposition. Assumption 1, there are no transaction costs, no taxes. Investors have homogeneous expectation. What would this point mean? Second point. Investors have homogeneous expectation. Yeah, they are expecting same cash flows from a particular firm. All the investors are expecting same cash flows. Riskless borrowing and lending. No agency cost. What is agency cost? Commission? No. Agency cost is not commission. See, the management of a company, are they generally the owners of the company? No. But their job is to act in the best interest of the owners of the company. So in a way, management of the company is agent of the owners, correct? But it is not necessary that the management will work in the best interest of the owners. So the cost which is incurred to ensure that management works in the best interest of the owners, this is called as a agency cost. So in the proposition 1, the assumption is that there is no agency cost. Operating income is independent of how assets are financed. Okay, so if these 5 assumptions are true, then as per the Modigliani and Miller proposition number 1, value of firm would not be affected by capital structure. Okay, so how he's trying to prove this is, he said that this is a firm. Now, this is the value of firm, and value of firm is essentially made of value of debt plus value of equity. Okay, so let us say in this firm, this is a debt, this is equity. This is the other firm where it has got substantially larger amount of debt, smaller amount of equity. Again, this is value of firm. So it does not matter how much is the composition of debt and equity. Okay, because irrespective of what is the composition, the value of firm in totality is going to be same. And one big reason why he's reached to this conclusion is with the assumption that there is no there is no taxes. Is it fine? So you don't have to remember much in this, just remember this one single point, that there is proposition 1 with no taxes. We are going to see 2 propositions, with taxes, without taxes. That means there would be 4 cases. So the conclusion of first case is that value of firm is unaffected by capital structure. Is it fine? So maybe you can write down this in your notes. Proposition 1 with no taxes. Proposition 1 with no taxes. Value of firm is unaffected by capital structure. So value of levered firm is going to be same as value of unlevered firm. Levered firm means the ones which is taken debt on the balance sheet. So the value of these two firms would always be same. Now proposition 2, again with no taxes, cost of equity and leverage proposition. Cost of equity increases linearly as firm increases its proportion of debt financing. What would this mean? Correct. If the firm is taking more and more amount of debt, then since equity has a residual interest in the company, that means equity shareholders get paid after the bondholders are being paid, the risk of equity will increase. And because risk of equity will increase, cost of equity will increase. So think of it this way, a firm currently has, let us say, 10% debt and 90% equity. Okay. We know that the cost of debt is going to be relatively lower. Why cost of debt would be lower? No, there are no taxes. Assurance. So in case of bankruptcy, debt would be given first preference over equity. So the cost of debt here would be lower, right? So, and this would be relatively higher. So what if firm, instead of using this strategy, uses a strategy where it increases the amount of debt and it decreases the amount of equity to 80%. Now what happens in this scenario is that the proportion of low cost debt has increased, but then to compensate that, cost of equity will increase. Why? Because now equity has become more riskier. So from a shareholder perspective or company perspective, weighted average cost of capital will remain same. Is that okay? So irrespective of how much debt company takes, the WACC would remain same, because if it takes more debt, cost of equity will increase proportionately. Yeah, so what are the assumptions? Cost of debt is cheaper than cost of equity due to first priority. As the company increases use of debt, cost of equity increases. Therefore, benefit of using larger proportion of debt is offset with the rise in equity, resulting in no change in WACC. Okay, so the thing that you might want to write in your notes, write down. proposition 2, no taxes. And that proposition is WACC does not change irrespective of proportion of debt. WACC, weighted average cost of capital, does not change irrespective of proportion of debt in the capital structure. So there is one formula that you need to know here. Okay, write down this formula. Okay, there are few questions in the CFA curriculum where you would be required to use this formula and solve the questions. Okay, it's a simple formula which is derived from weighted average cost of capital formula. So if you split your weighted average cost of capital into smaller components and do a little bit of arithmetic, you would get this formula. Sorry? No, mistake. RD is cost of debt. Yeah, with an assumption that WACC is same, this is the formula which is reverse calculated. Okay, see in this case, RE is the cost of equity of company. R0 is the weighted average cost of capital of the company, assuming there is no debt. Okay, that means assume that if debt to equity ratio is 0, then RE would be equal to R0, correct? But then if the firm adds debt to it, okay, so debt by equity, and then whatever was the benefit by lower cost of debt, that difference between R0 and RD, that would be as a proportion to D by E. So imagine a scenario that where a firm is increasing the size of debt. So if the size of debt is increased, automatically cost of equity will increase. And if the cost of equity will increase in such a way that weighted average cost of capital will remain same. Followed? So which means how this formula is derived is, we have formula for weighted average cost of capital, which is proportion of equity into cost of equity plus proportion of debt into cost after tax cost of debt. But in this case, we are assuming that there are no taxes, so we are taking direct cost of debt. So what assumption we want to make here is that irrespective of how much debt increases, WACC has to remain constant. And once you keep your WACC constant, then if the proportion of debt increases, by how much equity should increase? If the proportion of debt increases, to offset the benefit of lower cost of debt, by how much cost of equity should increase in such a way that WACC remains same, and then this formula gives you the answer. Is that okay?
But here you are assuming that the cost of debt is constant.
Here the assumption is that there are no breakpoints. What we did at level 1. Then otherwise for every breakpoint we'll have to build a different formula.
And the WACC will also change.
Yes, it will change. See, this is so what you're saying is that cost of debt, assuming what you're saying is that assuming cost of debt will remain same is not a correct assumption. Yes. Then no taxes is a correct assumption. So basically at the beginning of reading itself, they have said even in the curriculum that a lot of people wonder why this part is to be done now, which is completely theoretical in approach, and they've given an answer that you should know how it was done in the past so that you'll understand the modern theories. Okay, so just remember the formula and remember what each proposition says. There is a nice graph given. We'll have a look at it. Y-axis is cost of capital, x-axis is percentage debt in the capital. Tell me, if the percentage debt increases, cost of capital should decrease. If the percentage of debt increases, cost of capital should decrease. It will remain same. That's how we are trying to reverse calculate it, isn't it? So this is your cost of debt. Right? The assumption that cost of debt remains same irrespective of how much is the proportion of debt. This is your cost of equity, and this is your weighted average cost of capital. So WACC is going to remain constant, and then as the proportion of debt increases, cost of equity is going to increase in such a way that WACC remains constant. And this was the formula. Are we fine here? So this graph is there in your notes, you need not draw this again. Let's move further. Proposition 2, now with taxes. Value is maximized at 100% of debt. So the moment we come on a with tax scenario, so without taxes the proposition always is, proposition 1 was value of firm remains same. Then WACC remains constant. Now we are in a with taxes scenario. So then value of the firm would be highest at 100% debt and WACC would be lowest at 100% debt. Are you following this? So this is value of leveraged firm is equal to value of unleveraged firm into debt into the tax rate. Okay, the formula is completely non-intuitive to me. I tried to look at the derivation, but it doesn't make sense. So just write down the formula. Okay, typically, the assumption here will work well if present value of saving in all the future cash flow would be equal to the amount of debt. Okay, which is not necessarily true. Just write down as it is. Value of the firm. See, we are having discussion on 2 points. When will the value of firm be highest? So if your assumption is that there are no taxes, then the conclusion is the value of firm doesn't change irrespective of whatever is the capital structure. If your assumption is that there are taxes, then the value of firm would be highest when we are at 100% debt, because debt will give us the highest benefit of tax savings. In the same fashion, if your assumption is that there are no taxes, then weighted average cost of capital will remain same irrespective of how much is the debt. If your assumption is that there are taxes, then weighted average cost of capital would be lowest at 100% debt. So again, proposition 2 with taxes. WACC is minimized at 100% taxes. And then we have a formula which is an extension of previous formula. Okay, write down the second one. If you would see, it is exactly same as what we saw earlier. There is only an addition of one term, which is the last term here 1 minus t. We're just taking the benefit of taxes. Done writing? So now we have one more graph. Percentage of debt in capital on the x-axis, cost of capital on the y-axis. Cost of debt, which we know, which we have assumed is going to remain constant. Cost of equity, which is increasing as a function of percentage of debt in the capital. And then this is your weighted average cost of capital. And see the graph now. As the proportion of debt is increasing, then weighted average cost of capital is reducing. What would be this point on x-axis? This point on x-axis would be 100%, because at 100% value of the amount of WACC and the amount of cost of debt is exactly same. Are we good to go ahead? So I think this is, if you know this slide, you know what is required out of MM for the exams. First, MM with no taxes, value of the firm is not affected by capital structure. Then MM1 with taxes, value is maximized at 100% debt. MM2 no taxes, WACC is unchanged irrespective of debt equity mix. And then this was the formula. And MM2 with taxes, WACC is lowest at 100% debt, and this was the formula. So maybe this is something you should write down in case if you haven't already. But for the exams, if you just know this slide, you are more than sufficiently done with this LOS. Next point of discussion is cost of financial distress. What would this be? Cost of financial distress. Excessive debt. If the company takes excessive amount of debt, then there's a possibility that it might go bankrupt. Right? And then cost associated with going bankrupt is called cost of financial debt, financial distress. So there are 2 points you need to know. Number one, this cost is positively related to amount of debt on the balance sheet, isn't it? And this cost of financial distress could be either direct cost or it could be indirect cost. What would be direct cost? Let us say a company is going bankrupt, then it will have to file in the court for bankruptcy procedures. So that means there would be some amount of legal cost involved, which is one part. But there would be higher amount of higher amount of indirect cost involved. No, not illegal. What would be the indirect component of the cost? Yes, loss of reputation, loss of creditworthiness in the market, or loss of trust. So direct component and indirect component. Let's run through the theory part again. Expected cost of financial distress has two components, the direct cost and the indirect cost. And probability of financial distress, higher leverage, higher the probability. Okay, so again, I don't think it is likely that you would be required to calculate. But let's say on the exam you see a question like this, where they say in case if the company goes bankrupt, then the amount of financial distress cost is estimated to be $20 million. And the probability that there would be a financial distress is only 20%. Then what is the expected cost of financial distress? It would be 20 million into 20%. Easy? Agency cost of equity. What is this? We just discussed a minute back. Yes. The cost to ensure that management works in the best interest of shareholder. We would call this as cost of agency cost of equity. So costs associated with conflict of interest between management and managers and owners. What is the conflict of interest?
Managers might go for temporary profit.
Temporary projects. Shareholders would want a longer term projects, but inherent conflict of interest is managers want their own financial well-being, isn't it? So they would want higher salary, higher incentive. Shareholders would want the other way around. Shareholders would want so that means there is a conflict of interest. However, shareholders will take steps to minimize this cost. Net result is called net agency cost of equity. Now there are three components to this. First one is monitoring cost. Strong corporate governance will reduce this cost, right? So what would be monitoring? Maybe one example would be internal audit, right? To ensure that there are well-built systems and mechanisms in such a way that decisions are taken in the best interest of shareholders. Then third component is residual losses, which is irrespective of what you do, there are going to be agency related costs. And second component is bonding cost, cost to assure shareholders that management is working in their best interest. Example is implicit cost of non-compete agreements. What is this? Yeah, so for example, let's say you recruit a CEO and you make him sign a non-compete agreement that he wouldn't, during the tenure of his job, he wouldn't get into a business which is in competition with the existing line of business, and maybe even after leaving the job, he cannot get into a similar business for next 2-3 years. Now, if you want him to sign an agreement like this, then of course he would assume a higher amount of compensation now, because these are more restrictive terms. So that cost incurred is called the bonding cost. That bonding management and shareholders' interest together. Is that fine? Cost of asymmetric information. Cost of asymmetric information. Yes, what would this be? No. Yeah, the fact that management will have more information about the business at any point of time compared to shareholders. So then the shareholders will try to gauge the certain signals given by the management. Okay, and that associated cost is called cost of asymmetric information. Shareholders look for signals by the management. Now, these are the signals that you might want to write. These would be helpful when you revise this topic. Okay, cost of asymmetric information. First point, additional debt funding is considered as a positive signal. Okay, and to me, it appeared counterintuitive, but you have to remember, additional debt funding is a positive signal. Okay, and the reason they've given in this is that if a management is taking debt funding, it shows that management is more confident about being able to repay that debt in future. That means the business is doing good, and therefore it is considered as a positive signal. Additional equity funding is negative signal, because managers believe that stock is overvalued. Issuing new shares in the market, and if you're issuing new shares in the market, then that means what you feel is that current value of the share is maybe more than what it is worth, and therefore you want to sell more shares. So at level 1, if you remember repurchases, we had a point which discussed that repurchases are considered a positive signal from management, because they believe that share prices are too cheap right now, the stock is undervalued, and therefore they want to buy back. So exactly opposite of that if the management is coming with a FPO, that means they're issuing another set of new equity shares, then maybe management feels that currently the shares are overvalued. Okay, but of course it is in a very restrictive context, but you don't have a choice, you just need to remember this. Cost of asymmetric information increases as proportion of equity in the capital structure increases. Okay, with the same intuition that they've given here, that larger the amount of equity in the capital structure, higher is the amount of cost of asymmetric information. Pecking order theory. This is linked to the cost of asymmetric information. Assumption: managers prefer to make financing decision choices that are least likely to send signals to the investors. Okay, so this sequence you would want to remember, that as for pecking order theory, what is the sequence in which money would be raised? Internally generated equity, then debt, and then external equity. When you generate internally generated equity, means just using your own reserves, and when you're using your own reserves, you're not sending any signals to any of the stakeholders. Then second preference is debt, because debt is considered as a positive signal, and then the last preference is external equity. This is purely based on cost of asymmetric information. Are we good to go ahead? Next theory is static trade-off theory. Okay, there's a fancy graph given here. To me, this appears to be one of the more intuitive theories of modern capital structure theories. It seeks to balance the cost of financial distress with the tax shield benefits of using debt. Make sense? Right? That you're raising more and more amount of debt, you have the benefit of tax shield. Your WACC is reducing. But what you are inherently increasing is the possibility that company might go bankrupt. Right? So how do you balance that in such a way that you reach to an optimal capital structure? That is called as a static trade-off theory. So value of the levered firm is equal to value of unlevered firm plus T into D, which is debt into taxes, minus present value of cost of financial distress. That means they are adding on to what Modigliani and Miller said. The first two components we saw them in MM theory. The third component has been added, which is the cost of financial distress here. Is it visible, the graph? Is that visible? Now see this carefully. On the x-axis we have firm value. On the y-axis we have percentage debt in the capital structure. Now this is the value of unlevered firm. Okay, since the firm is unlevered, they are not taking the benefit of debt shield now. Now what if they start taking the benefit of tax shield? This component which is growing here, this is the present value of the tax shield. This black curve that we see, this is the benefit that we are receiving from the tax shield, which is here, T into T. But the value of the firm would be like this blue line that I'm currently highlighting. This is the value of levered firm. Then what is this difference? The difference is on account of cost of financial distress. And then there would be one point, see, up to this the value of the firm was increasing, correct? So up to this point the benefit of tax shield was higher compared to cost of financial distress, but after this particular point here, this point, then it started decreasing. So then the optimal capital structure, in fact it was here, the optimal capital structure is this particular point where the value of the unlevered firm is assumed to be constant. This is value of unlevered means value of that equity component. There you are not taking any debt, so this is a value of equity component that is kept constant. By taking debt you started increasing the value, so that tax shield increased the value like this, but then cost of financial distress was this component, so therefore the value of the firm like this. So the point where it was highest, that is the maximum firm value. Okay, moving on further. Next point of discussion, target capital structure. Reasons why company's actual capital structure may fluctuate around its target. You don't have to write this, it's straightforward. So what are the reasons between difference in actual and target capital structure? First point, management may try to exploit opportunities in specific source of financing. What would this be? So, no, assume that the equity markets are on a bull rally, sentiment driven bull markets, and the value of your company share has increased in substantial value. So you can use that opportunity and issue new equity shares, isn't it? Or temporary the cost of debt has decreased dramatically. Okay, so the current yields in the market are really low, so you can use that opportunity and maybe issue more debt to take the benefit of lower yields in the market. That means just exploiting short-term opportunities from the market. Is that fine?
Is that the stock splits happen?
No. Second is market fluctuation. You have decided that your debt structure should be 30% and your equity should be 70%. And accordingly you issued the instruments, you issued 30% debt, 70% equity. but the price in the market will keep on fluctuating. And we know that weight should be calculated as per market price, not as per the book value. And therefore, we might not exactly be 30/70, we might be 35/65 or 25/75. Is that fine? Role of debt rating in capital structure policy. So what they say here is, if the debt rating is good, then automatically risk is lesser. Risk is lesser, cost of debt would be lesser. Cost of debt would be lesser, weighted average cost of capital would be lesser. Now, they've given a chart of different credit rating for Moody's and S&P. The only thing I would remember out of this is these points. So above this your investment grade, BAA and BBB, and below this your speculative grade. Effect of capital structure policy on valuation. When evaluating a company, an analyst should consider following. 1. Changes in the company's capital structure over time. Why? Why? Yes, because that will give you an insight of what company is trying to do in future. Maybe if you see a company whose year-on-year debt to capital ratio is decreasing, so that might tell you that maybe company is trying to become a debt-free company, isn't it? So for valuation purpose, you'll have to see the trend. Capital structure of the competitors. We know that capital structure is a function of leverages. Correct? We've learned leverages at level 1, and leverages are function of cost structure, and cost